Hi, it's Conor Svensson here, founder and CEO at Web3 Labs. This is a conversation I had with Marc Blinder, co-founder and CEO of AIKON. AIKON is building cross-chain identity and wallet solutions for Web3. In our conversation, we unpack some of the fundamental UX challenges users face with Web3 and why it resulted in the creation of the ORE Network and AIKON. We discussed how AIKON go about hiding users from many of the underlying complexities they encounter day to day on Web3, and also why gamers are a great audience to go after. We also covered why UX as well as DeFi are more important than ever given the events that have taken place in the crypto markets during the past couple of months. As Marc is focused on trying to ensure Web3 doesn't succumb to the same dominance by a few key players we have seen in the existing web, it was great to hear his perspectives here. Okay, Marc, it's fantastic to have you here on the podcast today.
Great to be here. Thanks.
So I like to always learn a bit about people's journeys in terms of what brought them into Web3. First of all, how they first kind of came across it, but then how they went from it being something that maybe captured their attention to working in it full time and living and breathing it day in, day out. So I'd like to start by just hearing your own journey that you've been on thus far.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. For me, it really is all about one guy, a very close friend of mine, and the original co-founder of Icon with me, which is a guy named Stefan Rover. He was an early encryption pioneer in Web 1.0. He's sadly since passed away, but he was a close friend of mine. We had spent many years just as fellow tech entrepreneurs talking, and he was just a huge techno libertarian. He was one of these like crypto anarchist types, right? Like code is law, loved Ethereum smart contract, loved the DAO hack. He loved the original DAO, like all of that. He was deep into it. I mean, and his background was he grew up in Germany. He had seen, he was West German, but was across the Berlin Wall from East Germany. In fact, he was on top of the Berlin Wall the day it came down, cheering and dragging people up onto the wall and stuff like that. So he was a real deep, deep believer in freedom and deep believer in technology to help free people from oppression in various ways. And he was the one who got me into Web3, right? I had heard about Bitcoin before and stuff like that. Like, there's money on the internet, like, that's kind of cool. But that whole concept of code is law, we can make smart contracts that are self enforcing, we can have computer programs that go forever, uncensorable internet, all that kind of stuff. He really got me excited about. And that was in probably 2016 when he really started putting the screws into me to do something in on the blockchain. And by 2017, after quite a lot of brainstorming and discussion, we ended up founding Icon.
So from these early beginnings, where your friend Stefan was getting you all excited about Web3 and the potential there, how did you, I guess, come to the decisions you did about creating the Icon network, and then how did the different components of it that exist now evolve from that?
Yeah, well, I think the thing we were trying to achieve was mass adoption of blockchain, right? Something that would be easy enough that the average person could actually use it. Because especially in 2017, but even still today, it's hard, scary, and intimidating for most people and most businesses. So what we did with Icon is we have this sort of top layer of products like ORID and ORE Vault that are very easy to use, that are designed for mass market consumers to get involved in blockchain. And then everything we build is built on top of what's called the ORE Network. That's the Open Rights Exchange Network, ORE. And the ORE Network is run by servers all over the world that we don't control. It is a proper public blockchain. And that means that the identities that are created are at their heart decentralized. And so maybe someone later doesn't like Icon, they don't like me. It is a blockchain, right? They can take their private keys, they can put it into another product, or they could build a competing product to ORID or a competing product to ORE Vault. And so we wanted to be really true to that blockchain spirit of anti-monopoly, self-sovereignty for people, but at the same time easy to use. And so that's why we kind of have these two layers. at the bottom layer, this truly decentralized network run by a nonprofit foundation. And then AIKON, the company I work for, we are for-profit Delaware corporation. We build software that sits on top of the blockchain. And so there's this two different parts to what we're working on and trying to achieve.
And so you've kind of done both top down and bottom up in that approach. And what were some of the, I guess, the motivations for creating the ORE network itself? Because of course, there's a lot of different blockchains out there, and it's I think it's helpful to hear from people around. At what point is it like you work with this specific platform and it didn't meet your needs for this reason, so this needed to be the next logical step you took.
Yeah, well, there's sort of two answers to that question, right? So one is on a technology, like architecture level. It is always faster and more efficient to build something that does one thing really well than a general purpose computer, right? So we've seen this with Ethereum, right? Global supercomputer, Turing complete, can do anything, very expensive to run transactions, very slow by internet standards, even though it's very, very impressive by blockchain standards. The ORE network you can't put a dApp on the ORE network. You can't put a decentralized exchange on ORE. All it does is manage identities and cryptographic signing of transactions. That's it. So we do that really cheap, really fast, much faster transaction per second than Ethereum. We can work cross-chain with multiple different blockchains. So we kind of have this technical approach that does one thing really well and therefore has to be in its own different code base. But we built it in a way that we wanted to be additive, not competitive with other blockchains that are out there. So right now, if you use ORID, you can have an identity on the ORE network that is controlling a wallet on Ethereum or Algorand or EOS or Telos or Wax or Polygon. And the next one's going to be Avalanche. After that, we're going to support Polkadot, right? So you as Conor can have this one ORE network identity that's controlling all these different wallets. But each app you're interacting with is only going to be on one of those blockchains. And we know it's not going to be on ORE. That's not our intention. We wanted to support these ecosystems that already exist, right? We want you using an app on Avalanche. We just want to make it really easy and efficient for you to sign in. And
so it's really sorry, go on.
Yeah, and the one, because I wanted to answer the second half of your question there, right? So that's kind of like the technology wise, right? But then the other piece is we believe the world needs a digital identity that people can own for themselves. Right now, digital identities are kind of controlled by this mix of like Apple, Google, and Facebook, essentially. And what we wanted to do was make a self-sovereign identity that could actually be controlled by people and empower them to do what they want on this kind of new frontier of the internet. So let's not repeat the same mistakes of the past. Let's build with a new approach that's more person friendly, right? And really and so that's the other part of why we did what we did. We wanted to have a standard that was on a blockchain, so it was truly self-sovereign, so it wasn't reliant on us as a company or any other company, whether it's Google or Apple or anyone else.
So with the ORE network, what were the reasons for creating your own network rather than leveraging something that was already available in terms of one of the public blockchain networks that are out there?
Yeah, we were really trying to solve two problems with the ORE network. One, we wanted something that would be really focused so that it could be very fast and inexpensive to use. So the ORE network can do 5,000 transactions per second because it does one thing really well instead of being general purpose. And so we really wanted to be really good at one thing. So it's sort of what people call a layer 1.5 solution. We plug into other blockchains like Ethereum, EOS, Algorand, Polkadot, Polygon, etc. And we're doing a big launch this summer on Avalanche, right? So we support all these layer 1 blockchains, but we wanted to do this kind of like efficient layer that would sit on top of it and do one thing, special. And then the other piece is because we have our own chain, we can have certain features like the ability to integrate with biometrics on your device, or the ability to have multiple keys in a nested hierarchy. So again, this is all kind of technical stuff, but really what we wanted to do was enhance the offerings that were already there and do it in a way that's still decentralized and true to our vision. And so that's kind of what the ORE network does, is that better technology, but also in a decentralized way that's true to our ethics and our vision.
So as a result of that, the kind of components that you have for the ORE network, the different components that AIKON has for the ORE network are kind of quite aligned with that. From my research, I understand you have the ORE Vault and ORID, if you'd like to just expand a little bit more about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So ORID is the thing we're best known for at AIKON. It's sort of like single sign-on for multiple blockchains. So a user can arrive with whatever form of authentication they usually use on the internet. So, you know, they might like to log in with Google, they might like to use their email address, they might like to use an SMS. Up to them, they can kind of pick one of these options. And then we create wallets in the cloud for that user. And for convenience, we store like an encrypted backup of their key in the cloud. And so for normal users, it's very user-friendly, right? Oh, I just put in my Apple ID and I'm off to the races. I can play this NFT game on Wax, right? Or I put in my Apple ID and now I'm getting NFTs on Polygon, or, you know, earning money on Telos, right? So we support all these different blockchains, but you as a person only have to log in with whatever you're most comfortable with. And you don't have to remember all these different wallets, right? So that's what ORID is all about. Single sign-on for multiple blockchains, and built for easy, easy, easy. That's like the whole focus of ORID. ORE Vault is a similar thing, but it's for multi-sig wallets. It's still in private beta. And so it's a little bit earlier. You know, ORID is a much more mature product, but the whole idea behind ORE Vault is that same ease of use, but for teams that want to manage digital assets. So it's kind of more like a DocuSign-like experience where you get a message, oh, Marc wants Conor to sign a transaction to send a bunch of tokens to Trey. Sounds good. You're going to look at a UI that's very familiar. You're going to log in with an account you're used to, and you're just going to hit approve to sign the transaction. So again, just everything we do is really around that ease of use and making blockchain more accessible for the masses.
And so with respect to the, I'm certainly interested on the ID side as well, because that's like one of the areas of blockchain, which is so, well, in the public networks, there's a lot of challenges there, because it's like there is, you do have protocols that are working on this, but the given is kind of pseudo anonymity with it. And so I understand that before as well, you were involved with one of the, involved with some of the standards here as well, the Open Rights Exchange, which is the ORE network, but in terms of trying to create standardization around that side too. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, so we're very focused on standards, like open standards and open source software, right? So we, whenever possible, trying to adopt existing standards and participate kind of in stream with other people in the Web3 space, right? So you know, we do ORID can act as a Web3 provider for EVM compatible chains. For those of you who don't know, that is the open standard that everyone uses, right? So we're not trying to fight the tide there. We're trying to act like everyone else. And so I think that's true. Also, you know, when we work with NFTs, we tend to plug into the most popular NFT standards. We tend to plug into the most popular layer one blockchains. You know, we're not here so much to like tell people what the right answer is. We're here to kind of bring these great ideas to the mass market.
And so with that in mind, like, as you say, the user experience piece is such a critical part of the whole Web3 experience. And it is so clunky right now. There's the kind of Web3 natives, you have to understand things that really only technologists should have to worry about, like what hexadecimal is, for instance. And so if we're thinking in terms of more the end game for where you'd like to get to with the ambitions with AIKON and the products and services and how they're used, what do you think that sort of landscape would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think down the road, we want to see a world that has a global financial system that is inclusive and has opportunities for everyone. Blockchain is the first system that's ever really been like that, right? I always like to talk about how Bitcoin is the first thing on the internet that works as well in Kabul as it does in Mountain View. Everyone anywhere in the world gets the exact same data, the exact same APIs, the exact same access rights, and the exact same speed. And nothing's ever been like that before. So now what we're trying to do is plug that knowledge gap, right? So that you don't need to understand what hexadecimal is to use this revolutionary new technology. And so, when we look forward down the road 10 years, I truly believe every financial asset, whether it's the title to your house or the money in your bank account or the stocks you own or the crypto or the NFTs, all that's going to be stored on some kind of blockchain, public or private. The private blockchains, they're efficient, it's great, but they don't do much to change the structures of power in the world. The public blockchains, they're more transparent, they're more fair, they're open to anyone. And so that really changes the way the world works, I think, for the better. And so we want to make sure that we are able to help create this new future for everyone in an inclusive way. And that's where we really want to see this market go. We think that's where this is going to end up. And the question is, do we build a system the right way, or do we sort of recreate some of the problems of the past? And not to get too much on my personal soapbox, but I have a real axe to grind here because, at my past startups, two of the past startups I worked at were focused on the social media space. And we really thought we were democratizing the internet and, giving people access to corporations or better customer service, all this kind of stuff that was happening. But what you saw is eventually these kind of unaccountable monopolies like Facebook end up behaving in this unaccountable way. And people don't really have a lot of other options today. And I want to make sure that, even after I spent, I don't know what it was, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of my career working in the social media space saying, hey, this is going to make the world a better place. And now you look back and you're like, that didn't happen. It's because the foundation wasn't laid the right way. And that's what we're trying to do this time, even though it's harder, even though we could roll out features faster if it wasn't decentralized. If we took that centralized approach, it's faster, it's easier, it's all those great things. But in the long run, you haven't changed anything. You've gone from one monopoly to another, or probably even just the same monopoly to the same monopoly. We need to take a fundamentally different approach at the core if we want the end results to be any different.
I'm definitely interested in digging a bit more onto the user experience side and kind of the more user-centric view of this world, because right now, as you said, we've got all these different blockchain platforms out there. And so with things like the ORID and that should hopefully kind of insulate users from the underlying details. But this is something that I think about too, which is why I'm interested to get your views on it. But it's with these assets on these different blockchains, or whether it's NFTs, whether it's cryptocurrencies, or whether it's just protocols people are working with. For those less native users, what would they think of those protocols as? Because one potential way I've thought about it is it could almost be like a bank account equivalent, in that they have assets on this one, they have some on this, they can move things between assets. But I'd love to get your kind of take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying there is sort of the best case you can kind of hope for with the technology as it is. You're like, oh, okay, well, I got my Phantom wallet, my MetaMask wallet, my Scatter wallet, and each one's kind of like a bank account in my head. And so I have all these different places I go for the different stuff I own. but I think even that's going to be too confusing in most cases. And I think most of the internet, the way it works today at the protocol level, is you really don't know, right? Like as an end user, like I don't really know if like when I'm streaming Netflix versus streaming Disney Plus versus streaming Hulu, like did that one come from the Google cloud? Did that one come from the Amazon cloud? Was that a homemade cloud? I don't need to know. I don't want to know. And like people that are less technical than me really don't want to know. They don't even want to know that like those are 3 different options, right? They just want to know what they're going to stream. And I hope, and our belief is that the only way we can actually get 5 billion internet users to use public blockchains is if they have this kind of universal user experience that they're used to, that they can, just come to the table and use. And they don't have to know, oh yeah, I used this, Uniswap was on Ethereum, but my other thing, oh, this thing is on Avalanche, right? My NFT marketplace is on Avalanche. So I got to put away that wallet. I'm going to pick up this wallet. I don't think that's going to work for billions of people around the world. And so that's where I think we need to get to a place where there's one user experience. And that's the devilish part of this, because that's exactly why you like the one user experience is exactly why so many people use Google ID, Apple ID, Facebook ID today. So the question is, can there be a decentralized at its core solution that provides a universal user experience that is familiar to people, but isn't controlled by a monopoly power?
Yeah. So it's kind of, it's those increasing levels of abstraction that get built on top of it, and it's hoping that there won't be someone who comes in and creates that killer sort of abstraction that most people adopt, and you end up with this, the same big player who owns too much of the market again.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, there's what you're talking about with the layers of abstraction. Like when I first used the internet, it was something called first class client, which was it was like its own little internet, right? Because it was before there was like the World Wide Web with web browsers that did everything. And then like at my, best friend's house, he had America Online, right? So you didn't even have like one internet, let alone like one browser that could use everything. You had like these multiple, I mean, they all use TCP/IP under the hood, but like there wasn't even really one internet. And I think that's where we are right now in blockchain, right? You have like stuff that's happening on Ethereum, you have stuff happening on Avalanche, and like it's 2 different internets. They don't touch each other really. They don't talk to each other, and they don't have exactly the same user interface. And that won't last forever. And yeah, so it's like, how do we build these abstraction layers in a way that gets better and better for real people to really use every day?
I haven't heard of first class client. I'm going to have to look that up after our chat.
Yeah, well, I am very fortunate to have been in a, public school in New Jersey that was very forward thinking with these. And like, I got my first email address as like a high school student in a public school. And, there's like, we'd share the like one computer and you'd like take turns, and then there's a little computer lab, but like, that's how, I first touched the internet, and it was amazing.
That's cool. So going back then to the ORE idea, and I guess like the technologist in me as well, without wanting to go down like a rabbit hole, and because I know you've got Trey, your CTO, so that'd be the person for the real technical stuff. But
well,
I guess
yeah,
more conceptually though. So down the line we've got like these whatever the abstraction looks like, but behind the scenes there's still going to be wallets associated with different platforms. You might have wallets that aggregate these different chains, but then and you've got an identity that lives on the ORE network. So how do kind of how does the ORE ID kind of interact with the wallets and these sorts of pieces? And I'm sure there's plumbing that you have there right now, but I'm interested as well in terms of how it will kind of bubble up over time too.
Yeah, it's a great question. So and this is something where, I mean, you just name drop Trey. He is really fanatical about doing things in a way that helps users protect their privacy, because I think most people don't understand how permanent the records are on the blockchain, right? So conceptually, the way ORID works is you have this like top level identity on the ORE network that is related to one form of authentication, right? So you come to the table, you're like, I'm Marc Blinder, here's my like Google account to prove who I am. And now I'm going to have any number of public keys on different blockchains that are kind of controlled under that. And that enables me to potentially protect my privacy by creating new public keys anytime I want when I'm using a new app, so that I know I'm the same person who's using Uniswap and using Trader Joe's, but they don't know I'm the same person. And so in the end, like, we really want to have this like public key registry where people can prove who they are, and you can come to the table and say, like, this is me on Uniswap, this is me on Trader Joe's, but without necessarily having to reveal to the world that you're the same person in these two instances. And that's one of the trickiest parts of the whole system, right? Because blockchains are built for transparency, not really for privacy, right? You have this pseudonymous thing where your actual name is protected, but at the same time, your records are completely public. Like, the whole thing is completely public. And so it's a really hard balancing act to stay true to that blockchain spirit, but also give people an easy way to kind of protect themselves. I think we've done a good job at that, but it's like an ongoing effort, and always a balancing act we're trying to deal with.
Absolutely. So you already have this kind of plumbing there now, but so how that will be though is, like, a user says, I want to do this thing, whether it's nearer term, it's still probably talk in terms of maybe a token, like an NFT or some sort of utility token. And the intent, though, is that the ORID would basically, if they don't have like a credential for that blockchain, it would create the credential there, and then it would, depending on whether you're doing like almost like transaction-based account, so every time you do a transaction or transact with a specific platform, it would create a new kind of sub-identity that can be a new identity that can be tied back to that chain, so that you're kind of aggregating these together from the user's perspective and doing all of that complex heavy lifting, which is ensuring that they have like a private key for this chain, that chain, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. So like, let me give you a real world example for the folks at home, right? So we have a game right now that uses ORID called Cog Slam. It's like an NFT based game. Download it in the Android App Store, the Google Play Store, right? And I might log in with my Gmail account to play that game. So as a user, like, I don't even really need to know that it's on Wax. In that case, they're on Wax. I download the game, I log in with Google, ORID creates a wallet for me on the fly in the cloud, and encrypts my private key, all these things to protect me. And I get this kind of seamless experience. I just log in with Google and I'm off to the races, or log in with Apple or whatever. We have another game launching. When I'm recording this, it's just before NFT NYC. You're probably going to hear this just after NFT NYC. So there's a game called Exotopia that's supposed to come out at NFT NYC. Exotopia is on Polygon. Marc Blinder, the person, is not going to remember which is which. I'm going to come log into Exotopia with Google. I'm going to log into Cog Slam with Google. I'm not going to need to know the difference, and I'm not going to need to remember. At the same time, I'm going to have two different public keys on two different blockchains, two different wallets. And so the Exotopia team doesn't know that I'm also playing Cog Slam. The Cog Slam team doesn't know that I'm playing Exotopia. So that's sort of the way the system works right now on ORID and the ORE network.
That's very, very cool. I think with talking to you, it's really helping me visualize actually how it's going to simplify this stuff for users, because I think that's half the battle is you get stuck kind of in one conceptual mode of thinking about the technology, but often you need to take that step back to think about how it can be, fundamentally changed. And so just to talk a little bit more about the ORE network as well, because I know that it's specifically focused on the identity use cases. In an ideal world, that becomes the global standard for doing, for the identity piece there. But I guess if the current breed of blockchains is anything to go by, there's likely to be multiple kind of identity networks out there, and certainly there are other ones out there, right? But how do you kind of envisage it playing out? Is there going to be, do you think down the line that ORID might have to kind of almost be interoperable at the identity focused blockchain layer, or be interested to get your thinking around this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I hope so, but I don't actually think so. So I think my heart is with a lot of these decentralized ID projects rather. So like, there's been a lot of attempts to be like, okay, we're gonna give people this like self-sovereign ID. You're gonna have this locker with your like private data in it. You're only gonna share the data you want with the people you want when you want. And the challenge with that is I don't think consumers, it's really hard to get consumers over the hump to adopt that when there isn't a pressing need. So you have this really bad chicken and the egg problem, which is, you're like, okay, this is the future everyone wants, to be in control of their data and like control their own identity on the internet. But why am I going to like wake up this morning and go do this? Right. And so our approach has been a little bit different, where we try and integrate at the point when you're trying to do something. So rather than convince you that you want a self-sovereign ID, Red Fox Labs convinces you that you want to play this cool NFT game. And then when you hit login, we give you a self-sovereign ID. And so I think the way this is more likely to happen is that people are going to kind of back into this accidentally. And so that's why we're taking the approach we're taking. In my dream world, one of these like more thoughtful self-sovereign ID projects really takes off and becomes a standard, and we can adopt it. And like, if that happens, we will do it. There are all these different standards, DID, global ID. There's like a bunch of them out there with very different approaches. But from my perspective, I think these things tend to evolve more almost organically or accidentally a lot of the time. And so I think that's what's more likely to happen.
Yeah, so it's kind of proving that you have the model that works to onboard all of these users before you start thinking about too much standardization and so on, because once you start standardizing, it becomes a lot harder to change things. So it's like, get that mass onboarding of users right, so that they have that seamless experience to and are using the technology without realizing it, over trying to kind of force something to go down a certain route there, which might end up with a worse experience for the end user.
Yeah, and just to like take a parallel from the financial system we've all lived with, right? So the system of banks has been around for thousands of years, I think, certainly many hundreds of years, and that originally, like, each bank was just completely separate. Then, like, here in America, you kind of backed into it with a social security number as a way to cross-identify people. It wasn't the intention. It was an accident that your social security number became a way to cross-identify you. But it was good enough, and so it happened, right? And then banks could cross-identify you. And now in Europe, you have this European open banking directive, right? So we finally got into the system after hundreds and hundreds of years of European banking, we finally have a law that's like, people need to have the right to take their stuff from bank to bank, their data from bank to bank. And so, yeah, these things take a really long time. And the in-between phase was this accidental, like, social security numbers are like the closest thing we have to a self-sovereign ID that could go from place to place. So, like, let's just use it. And so that's where, I hate to say it, like, again, I wish these things evolved in a very thoughtful and philosophical way. That's like what I would love. But, will your Netflix account be more likely to succeed as a global ID than a, whatever really thoughtful global ID project someone has rolled out? Maybe. And it's really hard to predict these things. And so that's why we try and be flexible and kind of agnostic about what are we going to support. The answer is, if real people really use it, that's great. And if it aligns with our values of decentralization, that's great. And we'll just have to see how things evolve from there.
Yeah. The world is full of these kind of standards that almost, you kind of question where they come from, be it like QWERTY keyboards or the different plug sockets you get for power in different parts of the world. And there's so many examples, isn't there?
Yeah. Like, I mean, growing up in America, and, odd numbers of houses go on one side of the street and even numbers go on the other. I live now in London, and you do get some of these streets where it just goes like up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then down, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I'm like, it just at the deepest level hurts me, right? It's like, this is everything I've ever been taught is being turned on its head with numbering here. And so it just goes to show that it's really hard to control the way these things evolve.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that you mentioned just now is in terms of you've got one game that's already using the ORIDs. There's another one that's going to be launched imminently. I've had some conversations recently actually with people who are in the I guess Web3 gaming world too, and certainly the impression I got from them is that gamers are people who take user experience really, really seriously, because it's like they just want to play the game, and if it's clunky and all this, they're pretty harsh critics. And so just in terms of, is that one of the reasons why you've sort of done some gaming stuff so far, specifically because you're thinking about gamers, or is it more that you're dipping your toes into a few different areas because it's what you're building here, of course, doesn't have to be specific to any certain segment?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we're building is general, but I think it's not a coincidence that this industry where user experience is so critical, like, games are for fun. If the user experience isn't good, like, it's over. And so I do think that that's why we've had a lot of success there, right? Like, if you look at other parts, right? Like, for example, we have yet to land a tokenized real estate project. I still think we will. We've talked to a bunch of them. But the thing about tokenized real estate is you transact once every few years, maybe once a year, if you're like a really active buyer of houses, right? Or buyer of apartment buildings or something. And so, like, if it's a little clunky, meh, right? Like, okay, I have to download MetaMask and I install MetaMask, and like, maybe it's a little scary, or maybe I use Securitize and I don't ever need to see MetaMask or something like that. But it only happens once or twice a year. Like, it's a little hard for us to really win those people over right now. I think eventually we will, but for folks who care more about user experience, because people are logging in every day or multiple times in a day or things like that, then we become like a critical, non-negotiable piece of the experience.
Definitely. I like that thought of that fundamental point you raise about it. Ultimately, it's people's leisure time. They want to have fun doing it, and it's a key point there. So if we're going to talk just more generally about, say, some Web3 trends, I know we've kind of touched already on how you think things are going to pan out in the future, but which areas of Web3 right now do you feel are kind of on the closest in terms of the fringes of mainstream adoption? If we say prefix that with the notion that, say, cryptocurrencies and NFTs have kind of already crossed the chasm there, people are already using them widely, but I'd love to get your take in terms of what else is really close right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think DeFi and NFTs are going to probably make a comeback as like that next frontier, right? So, I mean, we've had these huge meltdowns in the industry right now. When we're talking, it's like hot on the heels of the Celsius disaster and things like that. And I think, what we saw with Celsius is it looks like DeFi, but it really isn't. It's off chain. There's all this leverage. No one actually knows what's happening. Do I actually have my own tokens or not? Like, no one can really say for sure. And so I think those kind of disasters like UST and Celsius and other things that may come in the near future are going to drive people back to real DeFi, where it's like really on chain, you really control your assets and like everyone can see it and they have more confidence in a system because of that. So I think that is the next trend. I think NFTs are not going away. They actually are in the public consciousness. I do think the like paying tons of money for essentially JPEGs is going to be pretty rare going forward. But NFTs that do things in video games or do things in the metaverse, like I think that trend is continuing. And then the other thing we're building towards, 6 to 12 months from now, we're going to launch our DAO tools. And for those who don't know at home, that's DAOs, Democratic Autonomous Organizations. Basically, it's letting people create a nonprofit or for-profit organization on the blockchain that they can control. That has all sorts of ramifications. I think adoption of DAOs is going to be hurt by this whole crypto meltdown we're experiencing right now, but it is something so powerful and revolutionary. I do think that is definitely still to come and definitely part of the future. I've founded multiple companies. I've been a senior executive at a lot of startups. I mean, just setting up a corporation, like a tech startup, there's been just hundreds of thousands of tech startups in California, right? Creating a California tech startup routinely costs you like $20,000, $25,000 in legal fees. The DAO, like copy paste, launch, right? Like it, and that means people who don't have the same access I do to go to meetings with VCs or people who've started companies before, or all these or lawyers even, like all of a sudden they can do it too, right? You can have a startup that has a enforceable kind of legal structure. It's quasi-legal, but in some ways it's better than legal because the code is law. It's self-enforcing. Like that is something that's never been doable. And so I think that is going to be really amazing for people all over the world to have kind of the same opportunities that, people with some access have today.
Yeah, and you raise a really interesting point there as well about the DeFi in terms of everything that's been happening. Hopefully it will force people to use DeFi proper going forward, and that definitely has so much potential when people realize that all of these underlying protocols that are public have remained stable throughout everything else that's been going on. They've worked. It's the people behind closed doors, like you say, of course, the problems.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's part of why these things need to be built the right way at the core, because humans are fallible. Like greed is real, corruption happens. And so even people like I'm a Binance user, I love Binance, like I've used it for years, but they have all these like huge leverage products and margin trading and borrowing and all this stuff that can like destroy the average person if they try and get in over their head. And Binance sends you emails encouraging you to get in over your head, right? Like, hey, here's a $5,000 or $500 bonus if you like try margin trading, right? Because might eat your lunch if you do it. And so that's where, if you look at like the original work that Satoshi did or Vitalik did, there's not really a possibility to use leverage on the blockchain, right? Like every token is accounted for at every second. You can kind of borrow and lend, but you really can't, right? Like the token's in one wallet and like there it is. And so the idea of having this like super high leverage, or, you know, in the double hypothecation, which is where like the same token is used as collateral for two different things at the same time, like that is only possible off chain with Celsius or Binance or, you know, something like that. And it's not possible on chain. And so all this risk, all this danger comes from the centralized layers that sit on top of it. And so, yeah, we've got to be more careful about this stuff because it's not fair. It's just totally unfair to the public.
Yeah, I think that expression "off-chain finance," I think that really kind of nails it. I think that's definitely one I'll I think be adopting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something. So I for a long time have been highly suspicious of the concept of an algorithmic stablecoin, because if you read about the 2008 global financial crisis that started with mortgage-backed securities, one of the big problems there was you had these underlying assets that were supposed to be safe because it's like a bunch of real estate, which is a relatively safe category, and it was diversified. You've got like a bunch of different houses, right? So this is diversified if you think about the risk of one house catching fire and burning down. Okay, fine. We got a bunch of mortgage-backed securities. This one burned down, like we're fine. But the problem is the housing market all moves in the same direction at the same time. So you have this like bundle of houses in Southern California, and if the market cools off a little bit, all of a sudden your stable asset that's underlying this financial system all goes down at the same time. It's not diversified. And however good you thought the math is, you're screwed. And I think that's the same thing with these algorithmic stable coins like Terra, is you may have this mix of like Bitcoin and Ether and DAI and all these, you know, things, but they all correlate the same direction at the same time. Like when Bitcoin drops, Ethereum drops, which means Algorand drops, which means Polygon drops, right? And I don't think there's an equation that can solve that problem, right? Like and so those, yeah, I don't even know how I got started on this, but it's really on my mind because it's terrible to see the new world of Web3 repeating the mistakes of Wall Street. And also, it's probably not a coincidence that this has happened after all this Wall Street money has arrived on the blockchain, right? Like, who funded Terra? Probably a lot of people who spent a lot of time on Wall Street. Who funded Celsius? Like that New York corporation, right? So you get this like ethos of these Wall Street, like, let's make as much money as possible. We've got the perfect equation here. And like, look, it works on the spreadsheet. What could go wrong? And in reality, we've seen these problems before. We have solutions on the blockchain, but people are like putting stuff on top of it that breaks the whole system.
And in that respect, it's that transparency which keeps everything intact in Web3. Whilst there are the challenges that people have around the lack of privacy, and there are certainly very important, privacy is very important for some things, but when you've got a financial system and you can actually tie together all the transactions, it makes it a lot more resilient than one where you can kind of take this bit and just do your off-chain stuff, as you say, and then create that house of cards off to the side.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we saw with GameStop, right? Where you're like, there's more contracts shorting this stock than there are stocks that exist, right? Like, that's not possible. This is a double spend problem on Wall Street. And like, we have a solution on blockchain, right? It was, to me, there's no coincidence that the Bitcoin white paper was published just a few months after Lehman Brothers collapsed. That's not a coincidence. You're like, okay, what if we didn't have leverage? What if we had full transparency? What if no one could do this to the world ever again? But then here we go, fast forward a few years, and now all of a sudden we've got people's stuff locked up in Celsius. We don't know if your tokens were used as collateral in multiple loans at the same time or not, right? I'm sure it'll all come out eventually, but right now people don't really know. And so it was like, we saw this problem, we solved this problem. I say I didn't solve it, people solved it. But now here we are back in the same problem again. And so it's why it's so critical, I think, to be true to that blockchain spirit at the core of what you're building, so that it can't be corrupted in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the sad things always that comes out of this is that the people who are kind of Web3 natives, they know how to take their money off these platforms, they know how to do things like self-custody and so on. But we're just kind of not at that point yet where it's straightforward for your average person. Now, I'm sure, like with the work that you guys are doing, you're helping, bridge that gap there. But the industry isn't there just yet. And until the industry can get to that point where someone who has some assets on Coinbase, say, and they get jittery and they just want to send it somewhere, it shouldn't be technical. It should just be like, I just want to send this to my own wallet for a bit, And I think that yeah, unfortunately, there's likely to be a lot of people affected by what's been happening. But I think these, this is why, again, solving the UX side of things, and like you guys are doing, is so important here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a living example. Like, I am a professional in this space. I was a Celsius user for a long time. I started to get nervous that something might go wrong over there. I called my friend who is also a Celsius user. We started taking our stuff out. And I took 95% of my assets out of Celsius, but there was a couple things where I'm like, this is just too annoying to take out, because it's going to some blockchain I don't normally use. I don't actually have a wallet handy. It's not that much that's at risk, right? Because I've taken most of it out on the bigger blockchains I use all the time. And so, I still have 5% of my assets that were on Celsius still trapped in there. And who knows if those may never come out, and lessons learned. But I feel terrible for people that don't have the same knowledge I do. I feel honestly guilty I didn't make some noise publicly that I was doing this, but I really didn't know anything. It's just this hunch, right? And so, yeah, it is one of those things where the average person, it is not easy for them. And it's I can see why people use Coinbase. We don't have a solution that's as good as Coinbase, but self-sovereign yet. But we'll get there. We will get there. And I hope people use it when we do.
Absolutely. So it feels like a good note to finish up on there. But Marc, if people want to follow you or reach out to you, are you active on any specific social media platforms? And also, if they want to learn more about AIKON and the ORE Network, where should they go?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter at mblinder, just can't see, mblinder. ORE.network is the website for the ORE Network. Very easy to remember, ORE.network. And AIKON is AIKON.com. If you come to those websites, you can reach out. We have a very active Telegram channel. It's all linked from both ORE.network and AIKON. And yeah, like I said, reach out on Twitter, or come to our website, or whatever you want to do.
Awesome. Well, Marc, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you today, and I look forward to watching the ORID, Vault, and the network continuing to grow.
Thanks. Great talking to you.
Hi, it's Conor Svensson here again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm really excited to share with you that I've written a book, The Blockchain Innovators Handbook, a leader's guide to understanding, adopting, and succeeding with this disruptive technology. I've been wanting to share my learnings about blockchain and Web3 for a number of years with a wider audience, and I'm really excited that I can do this now. This book covers everything from the fundamentals of the technology through to opportunity identification and implementation for your business to ensure that you can be one of the big beneficiaries of the wider transition to Web3 that's taking place now. The book is available in physical as well as digital form. For more information, head to web3labs.com/innovators.